It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. This week, we return to the adventures of investigative reporter Carl Kolchak in the 5th episode of Kolchak, the Night Stalker. In this episode, The Werewolf, things are likely going to get pretty hairy for our favorite reporter, but before I dive in, I want to talk about a key guest star in this episode, Eric Braeden. Now, Braeden was born in Germany in 1941. In 1945, he was on board the MV Wilhelm Gustloff. The ship was a military transport vessel used to evacuate German civilians and military refugees. On January 30, 1945, the Gustloff was attacked by a Soviet submarine, and it sunk. Now, while Braeden survived the sinking, obviously, it was estimated that 9,400 people died in the attack. It went down as the largest loss of life in a single ship sinking in the history of the world. In 1959, he immigrated to the United States and went to college in Montana. Now, over the course of his career as an actor, he got off to a pretty good start, appearing in several shows and appeared in every single episode of The Rat Patrol under his birth name, Hans Gundegast. In 1980, he got the role that would essentially define his entire career. He would join the cast of one of the most popular daytime soap operas in TV history, The Young and the Restless. On February 8, 1980, Braeden made his first appearance as Victor Newman. It's a role he still plays today. At the time of writing this and recording this episode, he's nearing his 4,000th episode. He's been nominated for 8 Daytime Emmy Awards, winning once. And he's such an icon in basically daytime television that he has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Now, all that's great, but my favorite work of his as the evil Dr. Otto Haslin in Escape from the Planet of the Apes. But anyway, let's get into this 5th episode of Kolchak the Night Stalker that premiered on Friday, November 1st, 1974, just in time for kiddies to settle in for a late night of enjoying the night before's haul of Halloween candy. And Carl Kolchak begins this episode by giving details about a recently reported wolf attack that killed several people within a family in Montana, a part of Montana that has had no wolf shenanigans for at least 25 years before. Now, meanwhile, back in Chicago, editor Tony Vincenzo is about to set sail on a long-deserved holiday vacation during one of Chicago's worst winters that also has had most of the INS office completely and totally swamped by flu. But unfortunately, the New York office of the Independent News Service is sending someone to audit the Chicago office, and it will disrupt Vincenzo's cruise vacation. So due to this, Kolchak is getting the tickets to go on the cruise, but he has one requirement for his favorite writer. Basically get all sorts of stories about the boat, stories about the people on this singles cruise, just stories in general. Now, we know old Kolchak will be absolutely the most professional and hardworking reporter for this so-called assignment. The first night of that cruise, shortly after the moon had risen in the sky, a woman coming back from the ship's casino, upset that she lost all her gambling money, loses a whole bunch more when a hairy beast grabs her and tosses her overboard. Next, the crew in the ship's bridge are attacked and killed, and as Kolchak has an uncomfortable conversation with Paula, one of the single women that he is talking to in the ballroom, a blowhorn goes off late at night that Kolchak wants to kind of find out more about. And when he's turned away from asking the captain any questions, he hears commotion that sounds like a struggle. And again, he's turned back, but he doesn't buy what the crewmen say has happened, which is something about a burst line that was blowing around and knocked a couple of men out. Undeterred, Kolchak asks Paula to help him by creating a distraction so that he can get into the radio room and learn what's being sent out from the ship. And he learns the ship's officers are trying to find out if anyone on this cruise has a criminal record. Meanwhile, two couples have been attacked when this hairy monster, which happens to be a werewolf, attacked them and threw them into an empty pool in the first class portion of the ship. The ship's crew then gets attacked by the werewolf, and one of the men is thrown into Kolchak, who gets knocked out while he's taking pictures. The next day, Kolchak is resting in the infirmary with Bernhard Stiglitz. Now, Stiglitz, played by Eric Braeden, is seeking help for nightmares and a wound on his arm that he says he's had for weeks. It's not healed, which is bizarre. And of course, the doctor on board tries to figure out, it's like, well, do you have any coagulation problems and so forth? But Stiglitz gets quite upset and grumpy when he starts asking for help to sleep. In particular, he wants narcotics, but the doctor will not give him anything like that. Naturally, Kolchak also rankles the ship's captain, Captain Wells, who confiscates his pictures and sees something that is quite startling in the picture, that werewolf that attacked everybody the night before. Now, Paula, being a movie buff, mentions that she's overheard a couple of people say something about a werewolf, and she knows something that's been said in all the old movies about silver bullets. She also helps get in contact with Vincenzo when Kolchak is kind of locked out of being able to call out from the ship, mostly because he is a reporter and the ship's officers know this. But she finds out about these past wolf attacks. One that was talked about at the beginning, that happened exactly 4 weeks ago, and then another one that was exactly 4 weeks before that. And that attack was had something to do with NATO officers in Greenland. Now, NATO is something that Stiglitz mentioned in the infirmary, so Kolchak knows that these things have to be connected in some way. Kolchak is able to, through a series of kind of funny events, obtain the silver buttons off the captain's dress coat to basically melt down, and they bring in a flunked seminary student who has the proper ability to speak the Latin that can bless these bullets. That night, Stiglitz does transform into a werewolf despite trying to restrain himself, and the crew of the ship try to shoot him as he goes on a rampage on deck. But, well, they don't have any silver bullets, so Kolchak has to take his shotgun shells of a shotgun that he's obtained and mix the silver into the shells, and then he goes a werewolf hunting. Just as Kolchak is cornered by Stiglitz, he gets a couple of shots off, and the werewolf threat is ended when Stiglitz falls overboard. All records of this man being on board the ship and being part of NATO get scrubbed, and any survivors of the attacks on board the ship were supposedly sent to Switzerland to be treated for a rare blood condition. Of course, Kolchak's report about what really happened is also rejected by Vincenzo. So let's get to the three things I like about this episode, The Werewolf. First up, of course, I like that Kolchak is getting to go on a tropical cruise because Vincenzo can't. That said, what I like the most about how this is framed. I suppose in the early 70s, I guess it's possible, at least I kind of feel like this is the case with how this episode is framed, that the cruise industry was kind of in trouble because, as Kolchak puts it, the 747 made travel a different way a little bit easier for people. And he tells the story about how great this ship he's on was supposed to be. It survived U-boats, it survived storms, and it was supposed to be the greatest vessel on the seas. But the 747 changed the travel industry, and it's given this ship something that it can't quite get over, which is a loss of business. So the ship is now doing these kind of theme cruises. So now you have all these horny singles trying to hook up with each other. It kind of creates this interesting atmosphere. how often do you find a werewolf attacking a singles mingle, right? I mean, let alone one on a cruise ship. It's just a different type of setting. It also has this, idea of a captive group of people. It's kind of like the movie Alien. You can't get away from a monster by running away or going down an alley. You can't get away from the alien if you're in a spaceship. Or you can't get away from this werewolf if you're out in the middle of the ocean. I just kind of like that neat little idea that they had for the setting of this werewolf story. Second, I really like the oddballs that Kolchak is kind of stuck with here. It's fun to see him be the exasperated one instead of him doing that to others. His roommate for the cruise is just the smarmy swinger type guy who has a bad haircut and a worse leisure suit, and his name is Mel. What's funny is it seems like he's already picked up a lady, but what it is it's actually his ex-wife. Apparently they were married, but they decided they wanted to open up the marriage and basically become swingers, so they got divorced, but they're still sleeping together. It's a whole thing. But this Mel character uses tired old pickup lines that even Kolchak knows, like, do you know why they call it a bikini? Well, it's because that's where they blew up the atomic bomb. And he's just annoying and constantly says Kolchak, being a member of the press, is the member of the fifth column and not the fourth estate. He's the type of guy who thinks that just because you are where he is, you have to be every bit part of that same scene that he is. And just, it's so annoying. I would hate being in a room with this guy. But, so because of the way he acts, he finds a lady where they're at in this, which happens to be Paula in this ballroom, and like basically forces an introduction between Kolchak and Paula. Now Paula is not a bad looking lady, but she talks on and on and on, and I can imagine why she's single. Now I'm not sure Kolchak needs this kind of distraction when he really does seem like he's trying to get his articles done for this assignment. I mean, despite the luxury and the tropical nature of it all. But it is fun to see him be the one that's bothered by everybody else instead of everybody being bothered by him. Nice change of pace there. Thirdly, the last 15 minutes or so of this episode are really pretty decent. There's a little extra tension with that setting, like I mentioned previously. And couple that with Kolchak being on board with a bunch of weirdos only kind of adds to it. You have this concierge who is almost willing to do anything for Kolchak for the right price to help him get that silver. You also have the roommate Mel, who knows that there's kind of a loser failed priest on board who might be able to do the blessing for the silver. And then you have the final showdown where Kolchak begins hunting Stiglitz, but Stiglitz is also stalking Kolchak. There are some good usage of the various shots in the layout of the deck of a liner like this. Also, they use shadows of the creeping werewolf. That's played pretty well too. There's almost an old-timey movie feel to the final act of this episode with those shadows like that. But lastly, the entire cover-up of what happened is always welcome in these types of shows. I believe it's stated that this is the final voyage of this grand old ocean liner. So when things were decommissioned and deconstructed, all the evidence of the various attacks were easily covered up. The existence of Stiglitz is also covered up. It just all gets swept under a rug, and there will be people who will know what happened and others who will think they understand what happened, but they weren't there, so they don't really know that, yes, there was a freaking werewolf on this boat. It's this type of stuff that makes Kolchak a favorite of mine. All this weird stuff that he and people directly involved with the specific incidents know, but it's all buried and ignored and tossed aside. Plus, there's something added to the end of this episode as well, and that is that Stiglitz was never recovered, so it's possible that he's not actually dead. It's just that he's no longer threatening the boat. But anyway, That wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon at filmseizure.com. But don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure Podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new articles every Friday morning. Now, next time, I decide to kick the summer off by catching up with some old Universal monsters, and we begin with a stop at the House of Frankenstein. So until next week, stay spooky.